Hey everybody, just sitting around here again in my own thoughts. Well, kind of. Sometimes they come, and sometimes getting kind of caught in the day-to-day, and again, that avoids the thoughts. So building off last week's talk, just sitting around and overthinking things and maybe trying to figure our way out. As we were saying, it's not like the way necessarily to go. I think there's kinds of predictions and analysis that we can do. But one thing is to think about what you're analyzing. Maybe if it's some kind of an experience, like a tainted perception of what happened, that itself can hold cognitive biases, and sometimes the way you see things aren't actually the truth and the reality. Last time I was thinking and trying to confront clarity. Now it is not so much clarity in direction and energy and time, but there's clarity, and then there's commitment to that clear path. And in being committed and clear on the path might be more so what your goals are for a destination, not every step along the way. So I would challenge and say that action is more needed. And the action needed is to kind of reconfirm with real experience what is needed to constantly refine the path and the goals, and make sure that to reach where you're going, you have to be very, very aware of how to refine your goals, your strategy to get to what you set out to based off where you are right now. So let's say I wanted to be in competition ready physique, men's physique or whatever it is. Wherever I am is going to dictate the steps needed. Well, once I was in high school, I started teaching guitar, and I would have to see where the student is in order to teach them in a way which they can grasp onto and progress with. Teaching is a good way to obviously confirm what you know. If you can teach it well, it's a sign you know it well. So let's use guitar as the example. Maybe bar chords might not be a day one, even though it can be fairly early on, like what is the guitar? How do you make a sound out of it? Any of you who's taken lessons or know any instruments, we almost take for granted where we start from when we're learning something brand new. That kind of beginner phase, especially when we're just learning, we grow so quickly, so fast. When you hit the gym, if you're new into training, that first little bit, you're making lots of gains, you're cutting, you're recomping, whatever, much easier. Your body's new, it's very adaptive to all that stimulus. Same thing with anything. So even in the thoughts running around, if that means that there comes to a point where I can kind of put into action something, just for instance, this is a new endeavor with YouTube. Put my first video up, it's not something I know the whole path. Maybe I will come a little bit smoother with words compared to even last time. Maybe be a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera, or not even notice it's on, just like you're recording an instrumentalist. Part of the trick is you don't think about what's in front of you. You just go. They're practicing, and sometimes the engineer would just turn on the recording without them knowing. Somehow thinking about these extra little things might make it a little bit harder for some people to kind of get in the zone. Trying to get back on track, thinking about whether it's a working out, whether it's something like picking up an instrument or learning. If you look back after you've been there for a while, it just seems like it's such play an instrument and okay, how do position myself so that the guitar body's in a way where I can feel like it's secure, because sometimes it might feel like it's gonna slip. Maybe even those little things have to be reinforced depending on where you are. Give yourself a month, few months, not even necessarily, and that just becomes a default, or the habit of tuning. Yeah, there's ways to tune with harmonics and a little more advanced and so on, maybe using your ear rather than a tuner or so forth, but it's just a habitual thing. Okay, I know I'm going to do this prior to starting, or if something's off, to adjust it as you go. A lot of live musicians, especially if they're seasoned, something goes off, say they're playing double bass, they'll just tune it right away. Even mid-song, even almost mid-phrase, I've even heard people do that. We need to just really be aware of our actions. And I guess that's how I'll title this, awareness, right? Clarity is one thing, but I think for that to have any kind of momentum, you need to be aware of the details along the way. Again, course correcting, actually moving towards something. Give the analogy of working out. If somebody's at a higher body fat percentage, let's say, they're not going to necessarily feel the difference in their physique from one day to the next, or give it a month, or even get it a few months, depending on how much you have to lose. We all know that if you're lean enough, then it becomes more and more visible and more pronounced with slighter changes. But if somebody's at 40% and they go down to 35, 30, something, but being aware of the details and the little changes we can make along the way in the process is an exciting kind of little mini game we can play to not be deterred by the long game that is with any progress in a new endeavor if we're fixated on the end goal. In a sense, I just wanted to encourage everybody that most of the time we have a kind of goal, we may not actualize that specific thing in the way we imagine it. I mean, really ask a lot of people out there who've achieved if it all went 100% according to plan. I don't think anybody will say that it actually has. The way that they envisioned absolutely every detail, no. If we had that kind of foresight, you wouldn't hear about learning the hard way or having to fail. Failure is a step closer to success. You fail when you stop completely, but you reiterate every failure or every time that it doesn't go quite according to plan. It's a lesson or a blessing, as they say. So either way, it all can be a positive thing if we align ourselves to having that perception. Plan to do formats like this. I find it's easier than carrying around a notebook and journaling just wherever I am. The comfort of I'm out and about and I can just turn on something like this and record and look through it and edit it later, rather than if I'm driving, let's say, can't be sitting with a notebook or so. So journaling is one thing to help sort out. So we can have clarity in one sense for a goal, but it's not going to mean that the path is presented to us. As mentioning, it's not going to be even completely clear with how we're going to navigate. And even if we see something, life will teach us that we're going to have to be able to roll with the punches. Not necessarily in a negative way, but the punches of maybe it's not going to go a specific way for better even, but not something with our foresight. I'm trying to think here. Seems like I would get on with some topic, mind jumps somewhere else, and keeping on topic might be a little bit hard. So this is, again, training, because we're all coming from certain places, and I'm not claiming to be 100% flawless. This is part of a refinement and part of getting better over time. I think anybody out there with any ambitions or have achieved or whatever may be has had to face a lot of things along the way. And part of the reasons why they've become so successful is an obsession with a certain thing or certain compulsions or certain traits that may not be always looked at as a positive way, but they have to change that and funnel it in a certain beneficial way to them. So let's say there's something that comes to mind at any given point and I'm not able to journal, but this is a kind of way to journal. That can help clear the thoughts. Last time was clarity of something to move towards, which you can plan out in different ways, 5-year, 10-year, whatever goal, and break it down into shorter and shorter timelines from the present and saying we can work backwards. And how does that look like? What do I need to do to achieve that? What are my daily actions, or monthly or quarterly or hourly, depending on how meticulous we have to be of things to ensure we get to that point, right? Which is important. There's an end goal, there's some kind of clarity there, but there's by chance, here's something, and we don't have a way to work towards it actively, well, that comes with side effects of not being deliberate with your time and energy, which I really presented last time, but focusing more on actionable steps. So, for instance, something like this, starting to learn DaVinci for editing. And if we're looking at the whole package, I'm doing things that are part of the package for overall growth in the field. So there's certain things, if you don't cover, they don't look good professionally. Social media, website, if that stuff's not available, how do you be contacted? How do you get clients? It's important. So is what you're trying to sell and promote and the craft itself. But too polar on one side or the other means that something's off. There's got to be a healthy balance that's struck. I'll say with the honesty you have to have with yourself. Just in a way, let's say this is kind of drawing on extending some more last time we had this talk. It feels like revisiting because there's maybe more nuance that I thought was important to dive into, whether that's for maybe peace of mind or maybe I'm still searching for a certain kind of thing. Either way, there's steps that are taken with YouTube, with uploading and just stepping out of that comfort zone, which is a lot of the time what we're trying to get to the end point of. It's not pretty. Yet it's getting better, but I don't think a harshly criticized first while is warranted. If we're honest with ourselves, if you hear maybe one of the early Beethoven pieces, compare it to later on, you can see maturity. Or, the first time any virtuoso picked up their instrument, they didn't start picking up an instrument for the first time with that proficiency that they did later on. That artistry is just not realistic. Realism is we put in the time, refine the craft, and learn so many more details about the craft and the nuances to being well-rounded as we go. Learn stuff all the time. Hopefully, if any of y'all are interacting with me, this could be a win-win mutual thing where we can learn from one another and help build each other up. There's some people that might be going through certain things like this, or have been, or may go through these things at some point in time. But there's that humanity and something that ties us all together. And this, in a way, for me, is looking at, here's artistry, and there's a totality of it. A lot of that comes down to the mindset. Even in not having the thoughts run constantly, but approaching things in a certain way. You can hear there's musicians, one who comes to mind is Steve Vai, and he'd talk about how to approach things and artistry and flow and like spirituality behind, or like Victor Wooten or whomever. Like, we're vessels for the art to flow through. Inspired in spirit, there's a sensitivity that has to be struck for the little details and the nuance and the beautiful thing that is art. It's not to be overlooked, and there are beautiful moments that can be, you want to call it happenstance or so, but there's a craft behind it too, and that's what I'm going to say. There's a healthy balance. Most important thing is just making a habit daily to go after whatever it is that is the immediate priority, and concretely dedicate that time. Really no exception, to be able to develop, and not so much for the sake of dismissing the present. Not to be cliche, but the present is a present. Easy way to look at it. It's a gift. And being so focused on the past could have detriments, but also on the future and losing sight of what's happening right now. Why do I say that? There's sparks of inspiration, eureka moments that maybe there's times I want to write something and document something and journal it down. Throughout history, those are moments that have really presented incredible things for mankind, really. When those are captured and seized and made into reality. There's too many balancing things that the artist or the visionary has to go through to strike a healthy balance. There's the whole motivation, inspiration. They're different, but there's that side, but I can't express enough how valuable experiences are. If you've lived a life that has something worth documenting, which we all have, bottom line, we can undermine our experiences, undermine worth, undermine whatever, and what can happen is you don't do things like what I'm breaking out and trying to do, of just I would undermine myself the whole time and say, this isn't worth it, this isn't worth it. But I can look back with more clarity, or having conversations with people, even just this past week, and there's a little bit of a shift, and trying to not mute myself and dampen the flame, or not try to build on what I felt was something that was a drive and as you say, a drive or obsession or like a calling internally. There's something that extinguishing that would not be something I would look back at my deathbed or an older age and be happy with the way that I live my life if I chose that path. There's a lot of people that have regrets in their deathbed because of looking back and not doing that thing, worried about others' thoughts or whatever reason. We can talk ourselves out of things, which is the segue to, I think of the examples like Beethoven, right? He spent a lot of years very formally trained. You'd hear of composers that might not have composed anything for the first few years, just for a certain kind of between mastery of an instrument before they even put the pen to paper, or learning counterpoint, harmony, form. There's like the gamut that they run through, and we all run through one shape or another, or maybe not. Some people don't, but that's not the point I'm trying to make right here. Not discrediting, because there's a lot of people may not be able to read sheet music, may not understand any theory or anything, but they can produce incredible pieces. It's very subjective in many ways. But onto the point initially, there's a lot that they went through. In that case, like say like Beethoven, for all that know, later on in his life, started losing his hearing until the point where he became deaf. The maturity, and even on the deathbed and being like gravely ill, the pieces that were composed were like, I don't know, at least to me, are pretty impressive, very impressive. But perfect example of a hardship that comes along with whatever path or obsession or so that they chose to dedicate themselves to in their lives too. Deep down, I personally believe we all have something great that can inspire, will inspire, or like we aspire to move towards or to do. That's part of like a humanity, right? There's something unique to each of us that would be all better off if we all explored that, honestly. Took steps towards that. So Beethoven had hurdles he had to overcome. Just like we have something, you might not move in a linear path, but we have things to overcome. The balance between any kind of inspiration, or maybe what you hear in here, or something you're trying to express, and this is how I see it. There's a craft that is foundational in order for a lot of other things to come into fruition, to be built upon, and to come to completion. I think if the craft wasn't there for him, he might not have had the option, as years went by, for him to play it out, hear how it's supposed to sound. I was hearing around his third symphony was when the hearing was starting to decline. So not from birth. If it was at that point, he had years before it was something that was starting to be noticeable. But again, building on the craft prior to. I think the craft may not be the glorious and most exciting and thrilling part of the journey for a lot of people. And I'm not even saying that it should be front-loaded completely and you dedicate a certain amount of time before you even venture to other stuff. There's always exceptions everywhere you hear. I'm not saying that either. What I'm trying to get to is a certain amount of craft would be beneficial, especially in times where you may not have something come straight to you And these days and age, maybe we can try and capture it and it might be a little bit easier, but even how to get to the point where you're able to reproduce what you're trying to capture is a craft in itself. Examples where even if you do have the hearing, Tartini and the Devil's Trill, where it was something he heard at night. It was a nightmare or a dream. The story was he heard this and he wanted to capture it, but only like a sliver of what he felt or heard while he was asleep came to fruition at the end. I love that piece, but if there was less of the craft to support making the end result, then we may not have had anything at all. Now, the craft always gets refined and better as we go along. It's not front-loaded to the point where, okay, now I can start after exhaustive time because we can always get better. So if we're always waiting to that point, well, we might as well never get anything out, because the reality is there's no end in sight or possible when it comes to something like art. The Da Vinci's out there and learning different elements of even science and anatomy, and it's a way to even increase the realism of his work. And they may seem tangential, but you can spend years and years of your life, and in a way that can have its purpose for an ultimate goal or vision. So I would say that be curious, don't lose sight, but don't turn away from experiencing a life that would not only bring depth to what you create, but can also elevate you to ways you didn't think were possible if you just chose to not be curious and explore. Be curious, enjoy. It's a beautiful thing when we allow ourselves to see it also in the bigger picture. It's a fickle... I've drawn upon a few points, not deliberately trying to contradict myself, but there's a long game, there's a short game, there's a technical side, there's throwing that to the wayside and not being over technical. You can analysis paralysis and not move. There's a certain balance that needs to be struck that may be more individual to people and not really a cookie cutter thing, but we got to explore, bringing it all back. We have a goal, we have a thing, explore. Don't be shy, curious. You're putting yourself out there. If it means enough to you, really, if it means enough to you, you're going to explore it. After a while, if you don't, it will affect you individually. I think the real artists will know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of impact that we can have to those around us, not only in the work we create, but the people we can be and how we can communicate, listen, reinterpret, and give different perspectives. The artists and the creatives, it's not just here in the mind and the heart, but like all of our being. We have that way to, in a way, bend reality. So it's a powerful thing. I believe it's really a gift that we're doing a disservice to more than just ourselves if you let that go by the wayside and thrown out. We're all in this together, and yeah, I'm here beside you guys, fighting the good fight. Anyways, thanks again. I'll dropping by, and that this also could have been as good for you as it's been for me. I hope to talk to you guys soon.